is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse, hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me, as always, is the founder and publisher of Unwinnable. I said, hey, Stu, where did you get such a handsome BBEG? And he said, I just called Central Casting. Stu Horvath.
What's a BBEG?
The big bad N guy, I think.
Oh,
yeah.
All right. Yeah. No, okay, I get you.
I'll cop to not knowing, man. It keeps popping up. And like people keep writing about it, like the BBEG, and I'm like, I should just Google this, and then I forget. But yeah, whatever it is, folks.
Big bad evil guy.
Don't send me hate mail. If close enough for rock and roll, man.
We don't profess to be experts in anything, right?
Yeah, right. I just write them. I don't need to know what they mean. So what are we talking about today?
We're talking about Central Casting, a series of source books that were put together starting in 1988. The first three were by Jennell Jaquays, who is going through a little bit of a second golden age thanks to the just announced Kickstarter for the Goodman Games. What do you call those? The Ore books.
Hell yeah. Get that money.
Yeah. 3-volume remaster of the Dark Tower. Usually when there's a list of like best D&D modules, it's all modules by TSR that were put out officially, but Dark Tower is usually referred to as one of the best, even though it was a judges guild, and that's Jennell Jaquays,
which I think is so cool. And like when I see a layout like that, you know, in the ad press and all that other stuff, and the books pop up, I'm like, the thought that comes into my head is always like Ralphie in A Christmas Story. It was the soft glow of electric sex in the window. You know, you can't stop looking at it, and you're really excited about it, and you don't know why, but I'm excited about it because I think it's something that is long overdue for a reprint in a really like totally sweet Goodman deluxe format, because they just can't not make something amazing.
Thing is massive. I don't understand how like I understand I'm working on what is going to be a rather large book, but like it's just huge. I don't know where I'm going to put that thing.
Yeah, we're doing a little ad for this now. We're not sponsored by them. We're not like paid. We're just riffing on this because like, you know, we love these books. We love RPGs, and you know, these deluxe tomes, and that's what they are. They're not, I don't even feel like they're books anymore. I feel like once you get past a certain thickness, you're a tome.
Yeah.
And do great work on them, and they're worth the money, because every time I open one up, I'm like, all right, this feels good. This is exciting. Yeah. I want to do this.
Yeah. Goodman Games doesn't pay us, but if Goodman Games is listening and would like to,
baby, I'll take your money. Anyway, Central Casting heroes.
Central Casting. We did an episode on Central Casting Dungeons, which was not Jennell's work, but is a similar thing. The Central Casting books that Jennell did are character focused. Dungeons is obviously dungeons focused. It's a big dungeon generator. It's a fantastic book. It's one of my favorite toolkit utility books ever printed. The thing about the Central Casting books is that people know that they're good, so they're sometimes hard to get a hold of for not a lot of money. So I had gotten the dungeon book way back when in a mix of books. It's like the stuff at the bottom of the box that I didn't care about. It wound up being like really like a treasure, and I immediately wanted to get the others, but at that moment in time, they were really ridiculously expensive. Right now, as of this recording, you can get most of these for not a huge amount of money on eBay. I'm sure that will change as soon as this episode goes out, if the rumors are true.
Gee, I wonder what'll happen once people hear this episode. The markup begins.
Somebody was telling me, I think it was Clint over at Fiddler's Green, was just like, I know that you have like a pile of these, and then you do an episode, you sell them off at a premium on eBay, and that's how you stay in business. And I was just like, God damn it, that's such a good idea, but no.
Yeah, no, it's not as an elaborate scheme as you would think. You know, we just have a lot of cool fans, and we appreciate each and every one of you. And you all have holes in your collection, and then we remind you of what's missing. It's never intentional. And, you know, tell whoever else in your household gets mad when you spend that money, we're sorry, but, you know, we just got to be us and got to be free and keep doing this. Little sidebar for you, though. You know, you've got a really extensive collection, and you've been an OG, and you've had a lot of this stuff since you were younger. When you see stuff in your travels and in your searches, and look at how expensive certain things are, and you look over on your shelf and go, oh, I've had that since I was like 12. I paid cover price for that. Do you get pumped because now you know you don't need to buy that at whatever they're charging now?
Sort of. I also, there's like, I have a really weird relationship with the apparent value of my collection. Like recently in the Discord, you can tell that this is a topic that I picked like 30 minutes before we sat down to record, because we're all over the place today.
This is the Inside Baseball episode, folks.
In the Discord, that fella in Australia who's selling his collection for 30,000 Australian dollars, right? And like, it's a pretty good collection, and I have a lot of that stuff. And like I'm just like, on one hand, it's like my Discogs. I'm like, oh man, look at that. My stuff's worth a lot of money. That's cool. And on the other hand, I'm like, oh my God, all that stuff's worth money. Like, maybe I should take better care of it, or like, I don't know. Like, it feels like a lot of pressure to know. Like, really, they're just books that I like.
Yeah.
So like when people start putting dollar amounts on it, I start to break out in a sweat. And I'm really glad that my wife doesn't pay attention to any of this, really.
Thank God. And also, I'm glad that you dust and you consistently make sure the shelves look nice and keep those books in good shape, because they are actually worth a lot of money.
You got to move them around, give them some exercise. It's like, you can't let a dog just lay there all day.
Yeah, it's like you're a supermarket resetter. Like, today the Oreos are here, tomorrow they're going to be over here.
I do kind of feel like that a lot. Central casting. So central casting is their background generators, basically. Flipping through them, they're a lot like they immediately remind me of the way the life path systems work in games like Traveler or the Star Trek role-playing game, where you're rolling on these charts to find out what happened to your character in the past, presumably if they didn't, like in Traveler, die at the end of one of their military service stints. And that's basically all this is just like that idea exploded out into enough material to fill a book. They're super fun. They almost function like sort of like weird character focused solo adventures where there's no overarching like story. You're not fighting a bad guy. You're just sort of learning what happens to this character over the years. I find that really fun, especially if it's just as easy as like, I'm just going to roll the dice and like flip to a different table and then roll the dice again. And maybe that could probably be the way my brain is wired, of course. But I think that this also, it naturally breathes more life into characters. I kind of have two settings for when I play. I don't play a lot, so like anytime I play is sort of like special, but they're either like idiots or maniacs. And I think that that's sort of a truism for a lot of players.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's two speeds for most players, and that's it.
Yeah, it's like barely has a pulse or psychotic murderer. But this gives you a lot of other options. Now, granted, this is a 90-something page book, so it gives you a lot of options, and probably in terms of playing a character, too many options, because you could just add endless detail, and a lot of it might be contradictory. There's not a lot of guardrails here, so you could definitely get stuff that like clashes or is just improbable. A lot of stuff can happen at inappropriate ages. Like you could just get jobs when you're 2, stuff like that don't really make sense. But on the other hand, you could probably make them make sense because it is fantasy and, what are rules?
Well, are we talking like 2 in dwarf years or 2 in human years?
So a lot of the stuff is also like open to interpretation because it's system agnostic. I mean, I guess there is sort of like an assumption that this is for D&D, but there's no real rules or mechanical layer to this. There's suggestions. There's like sidebars, like if you wind up being super strong, how to apply that to your character. You might get more money or stuff like that has like a secondary mechanical effect. But by and large, this is really just fluff. It's really hooks for you to engage with your character. And I think the key is that you don't want to use everything, and you don't want to take the book as gospel. You want to roll through this thing, get a whole bunch of stuff, and immediately throw out the stuff that you don't like or doesn't make sense, and then see what you've got left, and then use that and develop that into something and make it your own, rather than just rolling the thing and this is my blueprint, this is how I'm going to role play it, even though he's a pyromaniac who is afraid of fire. That doesn't make sense. That's going to be really hard. And if everybody else at the table doesn't have a character of this depth that's made using this book, you're going to have so much material that you're kind of always going to be overshadowing them. So I think that you really have to find the sweet spot in how to implement the material that the book gives you. Beside that, I think it's super cool to just have this as like a way to refresh, a way to just sort of snap you out of your usual approach to characters. it's called role playing. If I role play the same character every time, they aren't different. It becomes one long history of one sort of boring guy who stabs things. This gives you a chance to really reinvent your characters and play with stuff that wouldn't necessarily pop into your head because they reflect Jennell's thoughts about characters in a lot of ways. So like you get to play her ideas about characters.
Well, this really isn't surprising to me because Jennell was also responsible for the campaign source book and catacomb guide, right? We talked about that in a previous episode. And that one was another one that, if I recall correctly, you said went deep.
Yeah, deep into theory and more into the whys and hows we play that aren't really mechanically based. Yeah, for sure.
So this would be kind of the unofficial cousin book of that, because now that you know the hows and the whys, here's the volume of different aspects and paths you can take for the character you're going to play.
So, yeah, I mean, like this book is not nearly as philosophical as the campaign source book, but it is obviously the work of the same person, and it functions sort of like bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich, right?
Delicious.
Yeah, you go to a fancy place and then it's all of a sudden it's deconstructed. They don't bother to put it together, right? They just give you all the pieces and you put it together yourself on the plate, right?
Yeah, I hate that.
I ordered a sandwich here, but what that allows you to do is to see the constituent parts and kind of recontextualize them, right? You could maybe put the tomatoes on the outside if you want to be special or, sloppy. It's the same sort of thing here. This blows up all of your ideas about characters that are sort of just reflexive and uninterrogated and puts them all out in pieces like a Lego set or something. It allows you to kind of build what you want out of it. And in doing so, you kind of get to like reevaluate all of these things that you probably never even thought about before. And again, as the games are called role playing, I think that like the role is often, especially with the OSR sort of like test the players, not the characters kind of philosophy, I think the idea of the role naturally kind of takes a back seat a lot of the time. And there's like social reasons for that too. Like you're hanging out with friends, you don't want to be like a ham. It's not acting. We're not an improv class. So like there's a whole bunch of like reasons why the role is sort of naturally minimized. But these books allow you to bring a little bit of that out. The most fun games that I've ever played were ones that were like surprisingly role-playing heavy and improvisational. And it was a Star Wars game of all things, which of course gives you a lot of material to just kind of lean back on. It's a real like cozy seat to improv from.
Yeah, I mean, it's like an old soft shoe, like,
yeah,
especially if you're, of our age group, we've been around it enough that we know exactly what to lean into.
There was a period in high school where every day I'd come home from school and watch one of the original trilogies. That builds up a certain scaffolding in your brain.
Hell yeah, brother.
This just encourages that in different ways. It's interesting that it encourages it from a place of the generic. There isn't a lot here that you could pin to any particular media property or book or inspiration. It really does feel generic, which means that you can apply it to any kind of fantasy game, which is great. It speaks to its utility. And it's just a really great job. I think that toolkits are the best thing, the best sort of source book, partly because I feel like there's so few that are really, really good. I think that, I always love another new one. If you got bunches of tables where you're just putting lots of random items and objects and ideas out for me to kind of like graze over and pick through and put together and work off of, riff on, like that's the best kind of stuff for me. At this point, we're in my relationship with role-playing games. Like other people, again, like there's a huge learning curve. I've been doing this for 30 years and thinking about it for 30 years. So when I say stuff like that, I have no idea if I'm the optimal user or whatever. Like that's just where I'm at with it. I might be a pretty good benchmark. Who knows? But I just think that this sort of book is underrepresented on my shelves because there just aren't a lot of them. I'd like to see that change. And it's weird and funny in a lot of places. Jennell is also an artist, and I always love cracking open a book and finding her art everywhere. This one is, of course, all illustrated by her because she wrote it and basically did the entire production.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and there's just so much humor on the page, which is another thing that gets overlooked a lot, is that naturally, no matter what kind of game you're running, it's fun and people are going to laugh and joke around the table. And there's going to be gags and riffing. Call of Cthulhu games are like some of the funniest things. Like they just make people laugh, even though they're horrible and scary at the same time. And you usually don't see the humor in the books unless it's an explicitly humorous game. And there's a lot of humor in central casting, which is nice to see, because I feel like we all pretend on a certain level that D&D and other role-playing games are cool, serious. But really, I don't know if I'd want to play a cool and serious game, because I would go to the table to like have a good time with my pals, you know?
Yeah, give me all your dick and fart jokes.
So I think they're just really great representations and distillations of aspects of the hobby. If they're still cheap on eBay when you hear this, consider picking them up. I've been talking mostly about Heroes of Legends, but there's 2 other volumes. The second volume was Heroes for Tomorrow, which sci-fi, and Heroes Now, which is sort of like everything that's contemporary, which sort of like you can tell there's like a flapper on the cover and a superhero. So that gives you sort of the breadth of that book. And the Dungeons book is great too. Everything I'm saying about the character books really kind of applies to the Dungeon book as well, right down to maybe don't always use it. You really kind of need to use these books sparingly, because you're eventually going to mine them dry, right?
Right.
And that would be a sad thing, because they should be there like the fire axe in the glass case. Like, oh crap, I need a character.
Boom.
Boom.
And that's what it's there for, folks. Stu, do you have any final thoughts on Central Casting Heroes?
I do. I love it when there's a stupid or like meaningless or silly chart buried amidst like, you know, ones that are practical. Like there's a whole, I didn't really get into the table of contents, but there's birthmarks, psychic abilities, physical afflictions, military skills, unusual pets, unusual pet abilities,
ferrets,
significant events of childhood and adolescence, enslaved, ! Imprisoned, ! Love, !
Book sounds like a blast, man.
Yeah. Death situations. So there's just like a ton of stuff. I kind of dare you to pick one of these books up and not be immediately inspired to get to the table.
Well, if you're going to pick it up soon, you better do it before the price goes up, because this episode drops on Monday. And this was another amazing episode of the Vintage RPG podcast. Stu, where can the people find you on the intranets?
They can find me on Instagram at Vintage RPG. I haven't posted about the Central Casting books aside of Dungeons. So maybe in 2023 when I have some spare time.
Very cool. You can find me across social media at John McGuire RPG, and that's on the Twitter, on the TikTok, and on the Instagram. Real quick, just want to say thank you to everybody who backed Children of Uma on Kickstarter. It was
congratulations.
Thank you, man. It funded. We unlocked Mini Submania PDF level. At the time of recording this, we're in the home stretch, so we still might get to the physical level of Mini Submania, but either way, Children of Uma is definitely coming out, and it's coming out because of each and every one of you. So thank you so much to everyone who got behind us on our Kickstarter. If you like the show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Your reviews really do help other listeners to find us. And if you really like the show, why not become a patron? Patreon.com/vintagerpg. We got a behind the scenes look at Stu's book. What's the title, Stu?
Monsters, Aliens, and Holes in the Ground.
Thank you. I've been calling it tentatively titled Experience Points for so long. I'm having trouble fitting that in the slot in my brain, in the little gray cells.
I had to think. There was a hard pause there while I have to pull this out. I have to access the new part of my brain that this is housed in.
Well, you got a behind the scenes look at Stu's book. You got a behind the scenes look at action. You have a killer Discord community that we'd love for you to be a part of. Early release episodes, so much more. Patreon.com/vintagerpg. So for Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dega West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.